As she stood there, the light of the descending sun, which was now far below the rim of the horizon, paled, driven by a frigid wind, howling raucously from the mountains. Great snow clouds piled along the skyline. Out at sea, the tips of the waves became capped. Leprous white arms seemed reaching hopelessly for help from the depths of the sea. The sky blackened. The increasing gusts tore at the frail tents. The wolf dogs crouched low to the ground and whined. A tremor of anxiety filled the hearts of the tribe. Presently the clouds were torn to shreds and whipped furiously over the sky. In the thickening gray gloom, Annadoah watched the men of the tribe fastening their sleds and belongings to the earth. Mere dark shadows above her tent, tossed by the wind in its eddying flight. A raven screamed. Annadoah finally entered and threw herself upon the rocky floor of her dwelling. As the furies were loosed outside, her voice rose and fell with the wailing grief and wrath of the wind. "Olafaksoah! Olafaksoah!" But only the hoarse, evil call of the black bird answered during lulls in the storm, and Annadoah heard it with a sinking of her cold heart as the voice of fate. Fourth, "Do the gulls that freeze to death in winter fly in springtime?" she asked simply. "The teeth of the wolves are in my heart." Desolate and alone, Annadoah walked along a crevice in the land-adhering ice of the polar sea. The prolonged gray evening of the Arctic was resolving into the long dark, and the Eskimo women, as is their custom at this time of the year, had gathered along the last lane of open water, which writhed like a sable snake over the ice, to celebrate that period of mourning which precedes the dreadful night, and to give their last messages and farewells to the unhappy and disconsolate souls of the drowned, who, when the ice closed, should for many moons be imprisoned in the sea. An unearthly twilight, not unlike that dim greenish luminescence which filters through emerald panes in the high nave of a great cathedral, lay upon the earth. The forms of the mourning women were strangely magnified in the curious semi-luminance, and as their bodies moved to and fro in the throes of their grief, they might have been, for all they seemed, shadowy ghosts bemoaning their sins in some weird purgatory of the dead. In the northern sky, a faint quivering streak of light, resembling the reflection of far-away lightning, played, the first herald of the aurora. To the south, a gash of reddish-orange, like the tip of a bloody gleaming knife blade, severed the thick purple clouds. There was a faint reflected glimmer on the unfrozen southern sea. Snow had fallen on land, igloos had been built. Over the village and against the frozen promontories loomed a majestic yet fearful shadowy shape, that of a giant thing swathed in purple, its arm uplifted threateningly, the specter of suffering and famine. This wraith, brought into being by the gathering blackness in the gulches and crevices of the mountains, filled the hearts of the natives with unwonted foreboding. Profound silence prevailed. Already the sea for miles along the shore was frozen. The open water lay at so great a distance from the land that the sound of the waves was stilled. The birds had disappeared. Even the voices of the sinister black guillemots and ravens were heard no more. Annadoah's sobs rose softly over the ice. "Spirit of my mother, thou who wast carried by the storm winds into the sea, hear me!" Annadoah loved one Olafaksoah, a chief from the south. For him the heart of Annadoah became very great within her. And now the heart of Annadoah aches, for he hath gone to the south. And not until the birds sing in spring will he return. And Annadoah is left alone. Ootah comes with the lash of wicked walrus thongs, and there is no blubber buried outside Annadoah's shelter, neither is there oil. And the couch of Annadoah is cold, so very cold. Yea, listen, spirit of my mother, and bring Olafaksoah back, that he may bruise Annadoah's hands, that he may cast Annadoah to the ground, and crush Annadoah if he wills with his feet. I-O-O. She moaned this in a curious sing-song sort of chant. Over the ice the voices of the other women rose, and each, to her departed relatives and friends who had died in the sea, told about the important incidents of the year and the misgivings for the winter in a varying crooning song. Annadoah passed Tongigwak, who jumped and danced in a frenzy of grief. Tongigwak had lost 3 children, 2 had been drowned, and a newborn baby 3 months before was born maimed. According to the custom of the people, a fatherless, defective child is doomed to death. So rigorous is their struggle to survive, so limited the means of existence, that a tribe cannot bear the burden of a single unnecessary life. So in keeping with this Lycurgan law, worked out by instinct after the stern experience of ages, a rope had been twisted about the neck of Tongigwak's baby, and it had been cast into the sea. All this the weeping woman told in her chant to the departed. When she saw Annadoah approaching, she paused. "Here cometh the she-wolf that hath devoured the food of our tribe," she wailed, intense bitterness in her voice. "Yea, by her cajolery she persuaded our men to give unto the traders from the south our precious food, and now we starve. Yea, she hath robbed us. She is as the breath of winter, as the blackness of the night." Along the line of wailing women, Tongigwak's reproach was suddenly taken up. As Annadoah walked by them, they did a strange thing. The natives feared their dead. They never even mentioned their names, for possessed of great power are the dead, and they can wreak, as befits their moods, unlimited good or ill. Believing they could persuade the dead to array themselves against Annadoah, the women took up Tongigwak's denunciation and reviled Annadoah in their weird chant to the departed. Annadoah wrung her hands and wept, bitter and jealous because the white chief had selected her during his stay, their bosoms full of the harbored ill will and envy of years, because she had been the most desired by the young men of the tribes. The women now invoked curses upon the deserted and unprotected girl through the medium of the incorporeal powers. The dread of it filled poor Annadoah's heart. She quailed at the bitter execrations called upon her head. Instinctively, her hand reached through the opening of her artee, and she clutched at a piece of old, half-decayed skin. This was a remnant of her father's clothing, an amulet given her as a child, when saliva from the maternal grandfather's mouth had been rubbed on her lips, and which she believed protected her from ill fortune. "Ow, ow!" Annadoah moaned in pain. The women forgot their own tragedies. They forgot the messages they were imparting to the dead. Directly they might not be able to invoke any effective curse upon Annadoah, but well they knew indeed the awful power of the disembodied. And to the dead in the cold, shuddering sea, they told how Annadoah had played with the men, how she had betrayed them to the white traders, cajoling them to rob themselves of food, and how, because of her, famine now confronted the tribe. They told of the long devotion of Ootah, the desired of all the maidens, and how Annadoah had rejected him. Possessed by a frantic contagion of released rage, their voices rose and fell in a frightful chanting malediction. In the weird gloom their vague forms leaped about, their arms writhing like black things in the air as they called the names of their individual dead to hear. As their voices approached a crescendo, they danced with increasing hysteria. Some shrieked and fell to the ice groaning, their bodies twisting in convulsions. Others laughed madly, laughed at the dreadful horrors with which the dead would smite Annadoah. Losing all control, they were carried away by their delirious malevolence. Their voices reached a high, shrill pitch. Their arms clawed the air. Through the dead curses were invoked upon Olafaksoah, the great trader who had cowed them and robbed them. They begged of the Tonarsut that he might be rended by wolves, that his body might rot unburied, and that the spirits of his limbs might be severed and be compelled to wander in restless torment forever. They called anathemas upon his unborn children, and of their dead who should be imprisoned in darkness in the depths of the sea, they furiously invoked upon Annadoah's offspring the curse of the long night. Their voices shuddered over the ice as they demanded that most dreadful of all dreaded evils, that Annadoah's child might be born as blind to light and the joy of light as the dead in the sea. Annadoah crouched in frantic terror upon the ice. From the Greenland highlands a moaning echo answered the women. To Annadoah the hill spirits had joined in cursing her. All nature seemed to upbraid her. Tremblingly, with a last lingering hope, she crept on her knees to the edge of the lane of lapping black water. She whispered a pathetic plea to Nervik, the gentle queen of the sea, whose hand had been severed by those she loved, and who felt great tenderness for men. Annadoah listened. Thou art cold of heart to him who loves thee, Annadoah, a voice seemed to whisper in the lapping waves. Thou art beautiful as the sun, but as Sukenuk shalt thou be eternally sad. Thou shalt lose because of thine own self the greatest of all treasures. That is fate. Far out on the open ocean spectral fireflecks flash like mast lights on swinging ships. These mysterious jack-o'-lanterns of the Arctic are caused by the crashing together of icebergs covered with phosphorescent algae. To Annadoah the dead were lighting their oil lamps for the long night. As she watched the weird illuminations of paralyzing fear of the vague, unknown world beyond the gate of death filled her, and her blood ran cold. She felt utterly crushed, utterly helpless, and utterly deserted, both in the affection of the living and that of the dead. She uttered a despairing cry and fell back in a cold faint. The women drew about as if to leap upon her. A momentary wavering of the northern lights revealed her face grown sad and wan. The women stood still, however, for approaching in the distance they heard a man's voice calling, Avatarpe, Avatarpe, Akorgani, Akorgani, Anapunga. Those mystic words, believed to give magic speed to the one who utters them, came in the well-known tones of Ootah. A joyous cry went up from the women. When Annadoah opened her eyes, Ootah was bending over her. I was held in the mountains, Annadoah. The hill spirits were at war. The snow came, the storm spirits loosed the ice. I fell into an abyss. I lay asleep for very long. It seemed like many moons. I could barely walk when I awoke. I had no food. I became very weak, but I uttered the Sarat magic formula, those words of the days when man's sap was stronger, and the good winds bore me hither. A mystical silver light had risen over the horizon, and in the soft glimmer Annadoah saw that the face of Ootah was haggard and drawn. His voice was weak. The sun hath gone, murmured Ootah. The long night comes. Ootah heard thy cry and has come to care for thee, Annadoah. His voice was a caress. His face sank dangerously near the face of the girl. She panted into full consciousness and struggled to free herself. Ootah helped her to her feet. The winter comes, and famine, muttered Annadoah hopelessly. She pointed to the gaunt, hollow-eyed shadow, empurple-robed, against the frozen cliffs. My heart is cold. I am resigned to death, but I have come to give furs for thy couch, murmured Ootah, a beseeching look in his eyes. Thou wilt need shelter. I shall build thee an igloo. Thou wilt need food. I shall share all that I have with thee and seek more. Thou wilt need oil for heat. I shall get this for thee. Annadoah made a passionate gesture. A curious, perverse resentment for the youth's insistent devotion rose in her heart. Nay, she said, warding him away. My shadow yearns only to the south, the far, far south. Thy soul yearns to the south. Forsooth will I all the more cherish thee. Thou art frail, and the teeth of Ukiah winter are sharp. The teeth of Ukiah are not so sharp as the teeth in my heart, sobbed Annadoah. Ootah felt a great pity for her, a pity and tenderness greater than his jealousy. But I shall teach thee to forget, Annadoah. I cannot forget. Even as the ravens in their winter shelter dream of the summer sun, so my soul grows warm in all my loneliness in the memory of Olafaksoah. Ootah groaned with an access of misery. Frenziedly he caught her hands and pressed them. Annadoah struggled. His words beat hotly in her ears. But I want thee. My blood burns at the thought of thee. It is against the custom of the tribe that thou shouldst be alone. Thou must take a husband. No, no, she shook her head. But someone must care for thee. I love thee. Thou wilt forget, Olafaksoah. Thy hurt will heal. Annadoah shook her head piteously. Do the gulls that freeze to death in winter fly in springtime? She asked simply. Ootah did not reply. He was strong, she murmured. His hands bruised me. He was cruel. He hurt me. Yet he gave my heart joy. My heart is dying, dying as the birds die. I feel the teeth of the wolves in my heart. Ootah pointed to the women. The soft crooning of their voices reached him as they resumed the dismal dirge of their own woes. They hate thee, he said. He pointed to the constellation of the Great Bear, which glittered faintly in the sky. Yonder Kiliktaset, the barking dogs, would rend the gentle bear. Thou rememberest the old men's tale. A woman ran away from her family. She was false at heart. The good mother bear protected her and gave her food. But yearning for her husband, she returned, and to gain his favor betrayed the hiding place of the mother bear and her young. Then the husband drove out with sledges. His dogs attacked the bear. But they all became stars and went up into the sky. Even as the bear was good to the false woman, so hast thou made clothing for those yonder, and now they would as the dogs rend thee. Thou needest a husband. They would be bitter to thee, she argued, perchance, but I would protect thee. I love thee. Annadoah shook her head. The teeth of the wolves are in my heart, she said, and I no longer care. Yonder Nalagsartok, he who waits and listens, bends to hear thy reply. Ootah pointed to Venus, the brightest of the stars, to the Eskimos, an old man who waits by a blowhole in the heavenly ice floes and listens for the breathing of seals. Thou wilt come to Ootah, who loves thee. Answer, Annadoah. Ootah listens. He soothes her little hands. A wondrous light burned in his eyes. Every fiber of his being yearned for her. But Annadoah's hands were cold. Her eyes were sullenly turned away. In her heart a vague fear of him, a resentment of his very love stirred. My shadow yearns to the south, she repeated pathetically. I shall wait. Perhaps he will come as he said, when the spring hunting sings. In her heart she feared that he would not. Ootah, in utter anguish, dropped her hands. Annadoah sadly turned away. Falling to his knees on the ice, he covered his face with his arms. The sound of his heartbroken sobbing was drowned in the funereal chant of the women as, in a long procession, they passed near him on their way to the shore. When he raised his head, the rim of the moon, a great quarter disk of silver, peeped above the horizon. A mystical, melancholy light flooded the gloriously gleaming, desolate white world. The ice floes glistened as with the dust of diamonds. The ice-covered faces of the promontories glowed with the sheen of burnished metal. The clouds became tremulous masses of argent phosphorescence. Far away the women's chants subsided. One by one they joined the men in their grotesque dances in the distant igloos. Ootah was left alone. He gazed long upon the pearly lamp of heaven. The subtle sorrow of this world of magical moonlight filled his soul. Then the hopelessness and tragedy of all it symbolized were unfolded to him, and extending his arms in a vague wild sympathy, in a vague wild despair, he moaned, "Desolate and lonely moon, oh desolate and unhappy moon, desolate and unhappy is the heart of Ootah." Far away, in her shelter, Annadoah heard the sobbing voice of Ootah. And nearer, in an igloo where the men beat drums and danced, she heard the voice of Maisangwak laughing evilly. Of late Maisangwak had grieved her with her desertion. He was bitter toward her. But nothing mattered to Annadoah. She thought of the blond man in the south and the pleading of Ootah. As she heard his weeping, she shook her head sadly. She beat her breast and muttered over and over again, "Do the gulls that freeze to death in winter fly in springtime?" Fifth, what they heard was, to them all, the voice of the great unknown. He who made the world created the Eternal Maiden Sukenuk and placed all the stars in the skies, whose voice far, far away itself comes as the faintly remembered music of long bygone dreams preceding birth. And now, out of the blue-black sky, great globes of swimming liquid fire floated constantly, and dispersing into feathery flakes of opal light, melted softly. Ootah began work on an igloo for Annadoah. None of the tribesmen had offered to do this for her, and as only the men developed the architectural skill required to construct a snow shelter, Annadoah, until Ootah's return, was forced to continue to live in her sealskin tent, where she suffered bitterly from the cold. His back aching, scarcely pausing to rest, Ootah constructed an icy dome of more than usual solidity. This completed, he went many miles through the darkness to the south, where, in the shelter of certain rocks, he knew there was much soft moss. Digging through the frozen blanket of ice, he secured a quantity, and returning, made with it a soft bed for Annadoah over a tier of stones. This he covered in turn with the soft skin of caribou. Inside the immaculate house of snow, he fashioned an interior tent of heavy skins to retain the heat of the oil lamps. Of his own supplies of blubber and walrus meat, which he had secretly buried early in the hunting season, and which had thus escaped the rapacity of the white men, he gave more than half to Annadoah. He fixed her lamps with oil, and arranged them solicitously in positions where they would give most heat. He placed supplies in the house and buried the rest outside, so that Annadoah might readily reach them. Meanwhile, Annadoah sat alone in her tent, her sad face buried in her hands, her shadow yearning toward the south. Many of the tribe, emerging from their igloos, had paused to taunt Ootah at his labors. "Aha! Aha!" they laughed. "Thinkest thou that Annadoah will let thee share her igloo when the snow closes in?" They laughed again. Ootah seriously shook his head. "I would that Annadoah be protected from the storm," he said simply. "Aha! Ha! No man buildeth a house wherein he may not have shelter. No man layeth a bed of soft moss whereon he doth not expect to lie. Idiot Ootah, as well mayest thou expect the willows to sprout in the long night. Annadoah thinketh naught of thee. Why seekest thou not a sensible maiden?" "He hath given Annadoah half of his meat and fuel," the women murmured complainingly among themselves. "He hath given her his skins, he hath thieved upon himself. Why hath he not taken another to wife?" Verily, men are few, women are many, and all gaze favorably upon Ootah. Yea, his arm is strong, there is courage in his heart. He feareth not the night. He should press his face upon the face of one who is fair. His wife should bear children. When Annadoah passed from her tent into her new home, the women scolded her bitterly. The men good-naturedly jeered Ootah. Annadoah huddled near Ootah and gazed gratefully into his eyes. In the thought that he was there to protect her, the heart of Ootah pulsed with joy. Annadoah's heart was cold. Annadoah sat inside the new little house of snow, the oil lights flickering fitfully. In the dancing shadows, Annadoah saw the semblance of the form of the blond chief. Joylessly Ootah built his own home, and in their houses, in celebration of the fall of night, the natives continued their grotesque dances, beating membrane drums and singing jerky chants. They danced frenziedly, forcing a false hilarity. They felt the overwhelming approach of the dread specter of famine. In their dances, some sobbed, others passed into uncontrollable hysteria. Ootah alone did not indulge in the fierce ceremonies. His own igloo built day after day, night after night, he sat alone. His heart ached with the unrequited and eternal desire of all the loveless and lonely things of the world. Outside, the moon increased in fullness and soared in a low circle about the sky. The dogs crouched low on the ground, howling dismally. During the first days of the long night, the natives held a series of dog fights inside the snow and stone houses. Ordinarily, Ootah would have attended these, for a dog fight is of keenest interest to a tribesman and the Eskimos' most exciting form of sport. To a hunter with healthy blood in his veins, the dog encounter affords the same thrills as other men in more southern lands find in bullfights, horse racing, card playing, and other games of chance. Two lovers, both desirous of a maiden, may hold a fight between their king dogs, each hoping that success may determine the girl's favor. Pieces of blubber, animal skins, ivory carvings, and less valuable objects are often bet by the contestants and the onlookers. By all logical assumptions, One might naturally suppose that the Eskimos, whose night is many months long, through many dark and rigorous ages, would have developed into a taciturn and moody people, just as the denizens of sunny climes are joyful, effervescent, and pleasure-loving. However, this is not so. Troublous as is their existence, they preserve until old age that playful joy of life, that carefree ignoring of danger which we find in our children, which, alas, we lose too soon. Each day brings to them its novel delights. In their monotonous foods they find a constant variety of pleasure. In their simple games of muscle tapping, throwing of carved ivories, and fighting of dogs, they experience the exultant and exuberant fun of our schoolboys. Constant experience with jeopardous tasks has eliminated the human fear of danger and even death in its most tragic shapes. By long association has lost its terrors. When the long night falls and an ominous depression makes heavy the heart of the lover or fills with anxiety the heart of the father, they turn with a delightful spontaneity to play. Now great interest was aroused by the news that Papik was to fight his king dog with the magnificent brute owned by Annadoah. Both Papik and Annadoah were paying evident attentions to Anning-Neti, the chubby and ever-smiling maiden, who, while she showed a certain leaning toward Papik, had misgivings as to his eligibility as a husband because of his long fingers. Born of noted fighters, a dog attains the position of king or chief dog of a team by whipping all the dogs in the team of his particular master. When he has asserted his supremacy over the dogs of his own team, he is successively set before the rulers of other teams. And by a process of elimination of those which lose, the two final victors in a village are finally aligned against one another. In the series of fights held between the king dogs of the various teams, both Papiks and Annadoahs had come off with final honors. The immediate contest between the two most distinguished canines in the village was an event of exciting importance, and to the women there was a romantic zest in it, for all believed that victory would determine Anning-Neti's favor. At the time of the event, all who could do so crowded into Annadoah's stone house. In the center of a tense group of onlookers, the two dogs were placed before each other. They were handsome animals, with long, keen noses, denoting an aristocracy of canine birth, and long, shaggy coats, mottled brown and white, as soft as silk. A long line of victories lay to the credit of each. A sharp howl announced the fight. The two lithe bodies leaped together. The air within the little circle became electric. The dogs snapped, tumbled over each other. Their sharp teeth sank into each other's shanks. The natives cheered whenever a favorite secured an advantage. Bets were made. Papik's eyes gleamed as he alternately watched his dog and the face of Anning-Neti as she peered interestedly over the onlookers' shoulders. Annadoah's countenance was grim, not a muscle moved. Finally, Annadoah's dog, with a chagrined growl, unexpectedly rushed from the enclosure and crouched in a corner of the igloo. The natives effusively gathered about Papik, who bent over his dog with proud affection. In the excitement, Anning-Neti quickly left the igloo and, standing outside, gazed meditatively at the stars. They hung in the sky above like great pendulous jewels, palpitant with interior name. There were purple stars and blue stars and orange-colored stars. Some resembled monstrous amethysts, some emeralds fierily green, some rubies spitting sparks vindictively red, others globular sheeny pearls, creamy of luster but shot with faint gleams of rose, and fugitively sprinkling the firmament. Here and there were orbs that glistened like diamonds, wonderfully and purely white. Saturn, distinct among all the heavenly bodies, throbbed with a van-colored changing glow like a bulbous opal, and about it, with a strange shimmer, visibly swirled its iridescent rings. Thou standest alone, thou wouldst leave me. Papik, eager, triumphant, questioning, emerged from the stone entrance to the house and approached the girl. The other natives, homeward bent, followed. The girl was silent. Methought thou wouldst be glad. Thy dog is strong, the girl replied. Dost thou love that dotard Atalak? No, the maid replied. He is clumsy as the musk ox. They turned, walking toward the igloo occupied by Annineti and her aged father. Wilt thou not be Papik's wife? Papik pleaded. My shelter is cold, little meat have I. The white men robbed the tribe, but perchance the bears come. Then I shall kill them, valiant is my dog. He patted the animal's shaggy head. But thy fingers, Papik, Papik, no, no. But Papik loves thee, he protested. His skin flushes with the thought of thee, that thou didst also say to Annadoah, whom thou didst seek before me. Papik was silent. It was true that Annineti was only a second choice. At that moment an ominous noise was heard on the sea. The tide, in moving, caused the massive floe ice to grate against that adhering to the shore. To the simple natives, the noise indicated something more sinister. Hearest that? Annineti asked. Yea, replied Papik Olafaksoah. The monster who lives in the sea cometh with his hammers. He cometh to steal the children. In winter he is very hungry. They say he frightens people to death when a baby which is fatherless screams, and after he heats his ladles the babies often die. Again the grating noise shuddered along the shore, and Annineti, frightened, fled to her house. Papik, pursuing his way, accosted Ootah. As they were speaking, they saw Ootah and his wife emerge from their house. Between them they carried a small, stark body. The woman was weeping piteously. It was their child, which a brief while before had died. The sea monster had again claimed its human toll. Papik and Ootah disappeared. Papik to his shelter, Ootah to Annadoah's igloo. The parents, left alone, dug up stones and ice and buried the child. Then, beneath the stars, they stood in silent grief. Other natives, emerging from their houses and seeing them, understood and disappeared. For while relatives weep over their dead, none dare disturb their mourning for 5 days. In commemoration of the death, the parents would visit the grave of their child. During this time, no native dare cross the path leading from their igloo to the silent resting place, and while they stood beneath the stars, all alien to their sorrow, must remain within their houses. Only the Great Spirit, who lives beyond the golden veils of the boreal lights, may hear the sobbing of a stricken human creature over the thing of which it has been bereft. In the course of 10 sleeps, as days are called, the first moon of the long night sank below the horizon, and the colorful stars fierily glittered over a world of black silence. The cold increased to an intolerable bitterness. Ootah, venturing from his igloo to dig up walrus meat, found the earth frozen so solid that it split his steel axe. It was not long before many white mounds appeared beneath the liquid stars. The old and the very young, unable to endure the rigorous cold and dearth of food, passed into the mysterious unknown, of which the long dark of earth is only the portal. After the passing of the first moon, the storms came, the sky blackened, the winds voiced the desolate woe of millions of aerial creatures. Terrific snowstorms kept the tribe within their shelters for days. Often the winds tore away the membrane windows of their snow houses, and blasts of frigid cold dissipated the precious warmth within. In the lee of circular walls of ice, right at the immediate entrance of the houses, the natives kept their dogs. Inside they had only room for the mother dogs, which at this period brought into being litters of beautiful little puppies with which the Eskimo children played. Outside, scores of splendid animals, which could not be sheltered, were frozen to death in great drifts. These, during the following days, were dug out and used as food both for men and the living animals. During a quiet period between storms, Ootah, venturing from his shelter, heard a shuffling noise near his igloo. In the northern sky a creamy light palpitated, and in one of the quick flares he saw a bear nosing about the village. He called his dogs, and they soon surrounded the animal. Fortunately, the incandescent light of the aurora increased. Now and then a ribbon of light, palpitant with every color of the rainbow, was flung across the sky. Ootah lifted his harpoon lance. The sky was momentarily flooded with light. He struck. In the next flare, he saw the bear lying on the ice. His lance had pierced the brute's heart. Attracted by the barking of Ootah's dog, several tribesmen soon joined him in dressing the animal. During their task, one suddenly beckoned silence and whispered softly, the voice, and they paused. A weird whistling sound sang eerily through the skies. The air, electrified, seemed to snap and crackle. It was the voice that comes with the aurora. The knives fell from the natives' hands. The howling of the hungry dogs was stilled. In hushed awe and reverence, with vague wondering, they listened. Ootah was on his knees. An inspired light transfigured his face. His pulses thrilled, for what they heard was, to them all, the voice of the great unknown, he whose power is greater than that of Olafaksoah, he who made the world, created the Eternal Maiden Suk-Enok, and placed all the stars in the skies, who, never coming himself earthward, instead sends in the aurora, his spirits with messages of hope and encouragement to men, and whose voice sometimes far, far away itself comes as the faintly remembered music of long bygone dreams preceding birth. Yea, it was the voice. And now, out of the black-blue sky, as if released from invisible hands, great globes of swimming liquid fire floated constantly, and dispersing into millions of feathery flakes of opal light, melted softly. Along the lower heavens there was a fugitive flickering of a rich creamy light, as of the reflection of celestial fires far beyond the horizon. Speechless, Ootah viewed the flamiest wonder, and although he knew no prayer, he felt in his soul an instinctive love, a profound awe in the silent sanctity of that auroral shot and frigidly glorious region. He seemed to feel the pulsing of an unseen presence, a presence of which he was a part, of which with a glow he felt the soul of her he loved was a part, to which all nature, everything that lives and breathes, was vitally linked. He felt the drawing urge, the thrilling, tingling impetus, as it were, of the terrific currents of vital spirit force that sweep vastly through the universe, keeping the earth and all the planets in their orbits. He felt what possibly the primitive and pure of heart feel most keenly, the presence of the great unknown, he who is the fountain source of love, and whose hands on the sable parchment of the northern skies perchance write, in irid traceries of fire, mystic messages of hope, which none of all humanity, during all the centuries, has ever learned entirely to understand. Not until the wonder lights were fading did the tribesmen take up the precious bear meat, and according to Ootah's instructions, divide portions among the community. His arm full of meat, Ootah joyously entered Annadoah's igloo. Annadoah, sad and lonely, sat by her lamp. Her igloo was like that of all the others. Inside, so as to retain the heat and carry off the water which dripped from the melting dome of snow, there was an interior tent of seal skin. In a great pan of soapstone was a line of moss, which absorbed the walrus fat and served as a wick for the lamp. This emitted a line of thin, reddish-blue flame. Over the light, and supported by a framework, was a large soapstone pot in which bits of walrus meat were simmering. By the side of the pot, a large piece of walrus blubber hung over a rod. In the heat of the lamp, this slowly exuded a thick oil, which, falling into the pan below and saturating the moss wick, gave a constant and steady supply of fuel. Like the other women, Annadoah sat by her lamp day after day when she could endure hunger. No longer she would eat ravenously of the meager food in the pot. Regular meals are unknown in the Arctic. A native abstains from food as long as he can in days of famine, but when he eats unstintedly. As Ootah entered the low enclosure, Annadoah's eyes lighted. Ootah told her of the bear encounter, and with the joy of children they placed bits of the meat in the pot and sat by, delightedly inhaling the odor as it cooked. Several days later, while they were eating the last remainder of the meat, both heard an uproar outside. They crept from the igloo and discovered most of the village assembled without. Atalak hath carried off Aningnedi, one told them. He broke into her father's house and seized her with violence. Not far away they heard Aningnedi's screams. Atalak is strong, said one. Yea, as a boy did he not kill his brother? All remembered the brutal encounter of the two brothers years before when, throwing him to the ground, Atalak jumped on his brother's body and, striking his head with stones, beat him to death. Atalak was a type of the older warriors. Unlike his more gentle tribesmen, he possessed the atavistic savagery of his forebears of centuries ago when it was customary to abduct brides. An excited crowd gathered outside of Atalak's house. Soon Atalak himself appeared. He was exultant. Ha! Ha! He laughed. Methinks that is the way to treat a woman. Then with swollen up gusto he told them all about it. Tiring of being alone, he determined to carry off Aningnedi. A woman's mind is as the wind. It constantly changeth, he said. Women should be driven as the dogs. Aningnedi, still weeping, still protesting, came to the door. Atalak turned fiercely upon her and struck her in the face. Then he laughed again. The girl screamed. Well, he said, turning to her, I carried thee here. If thou wouldst return, thou canst walk back. Eh? The girl cowered away, but on her face there was the semblance of a pleased expression. The other women regarded her with a tinge of envy. "'Tis not often in these days a lover careth sufficiently to carry a maid away," said an aged crone. "In the days of old there were men like Atalak," said a younger woman admiringly. "Where is Papik?" one asked. "He was not to be seen. Dost thou not wish to return to thy father?" Annadoah asked Aningnedi, approaching her. The girl shook her head. Much as she had protested, she was unquestionably pleased by the forcible abduction. One of the gossips, desiring to impart the unpleasant news to Papik, had gone to his house. "Papik sits alone," she called, on her return. When I told him Aningnedi hath been carried away by Atalak, he replied, "'Tis well, 'tis well." And then he showed me his hands. They were frozen. Verily, he would now be a sorry husband to provide for a wife. Papik's fingers, frozen, took up the others. Unhappy Papik, he sobs and weeps. "He sobs and weeps," said the old woman. "He saith the dreaded misfortune hath come, and the days of his skill on the hunt are over." "Long fingers, short hunt, long nose, short life," remarked Mesangwak sententiously. Atalak, happy in his conquest, was broad enough to be generous. He declared that Papik should never want as long as he could shoot the arrow. Generous-hearted, many of the others joined in, and bits of blubber were soon offered the lonely Papik as he sat nursing his frozen members in his house. The mishap was tragic, for his hands injured, he had lost not only his skill in the hunt, but his ability to protect himself in case of accidents. And from the experience of ages, all knew that sooner or later he was doomed to a comparatively early death. During the first period of the night, and after Ootah's first capture, several prowling bears were shot. The howl of occasional wolves was heard in the mountains, then all the bears disappeared. The hunger of the wolves was stilled. When the third moon rose, not a thing stirred outside the igloos. A glacial silence gripped the northern world. In their shelters the natives clustered together, warming one another with their breathing and the heat of their bodies. They lacked the courage even to speak. Day by day their supply of food had run low. Day by day they decreased their portions. Their cheeks sunk. Hunger burned in their eyes. To save the precious fuel they burned only one lamp in their houses. They were unable to sleep because of the intense cold. Finally their food gave out. From his store, Ootah silently doled out allotments until starvation confronted him. One by one the dogs were eaten, and this caused a dull ache, for the men loved their dogs only a little less than they did their wives and children. The quaking fear of the long hours slowly gave way to a dull lethargy. In their igloos, where single lamps smoked, they sat, and to keep up their circulation and to prevent themselves from falling into a coma, they rocked their bodies like things only half alive. The black days and black nights slowly, tediously, achingly passed. One day was like another. One night seemed to mark no progress of time. Only the children, to whom parents gave the last bits of food, showed some animation. They played listlessly with one another. For toys they had crude carvings of soapstone, tiny soapstone lamps and pots with which they made pitiful mimicry of cooking. The little girls played with crude dolls, just as do little girls in more southern lands, but they were grotesque effigies made of skin roughly sewn together. The boys found brief zest in a game which was played by sticking ivory points in a piece of bone hanging from the roof of the igloo and which was perforated with holes. Finally, as the night wore on, the children lost interest in their games and with aching stomachs lay silent by the fires. Starvation steadily claimed its toll. Death, slowly, surely, laid its grim and terrible hands upon that pitiful fringe of earth's humanity, on the desolate star-litten roof of the world. One by one a stark body would be carried from an igloo into the black, bitter, cold silence without and buried under blocks of snow, and above, intense and incandescent, the pole star, that unerring time mark of God's inevitable and unerring laws, burned like an all-seeing, sentient and pitiless eye of fire in the heavens. Annadoah lay upon her couch of furs. Her face was thin and white as the snows without. The flame in her stone lamp was about to flicker into extinction. Ootah, entering the igloo, sprang quickly to her side. Her breath came very faintly. He seized her hands. He breathed on her face. He opened her artee and rubbed her little breasts. He felt something very strange and wonderful stirring within him, and with it a ghastly fear that the thing he loved was dying. Into the lamp he placed the last meager bits of remaining blubber. Then he again set to chafing the tender little hands. Cold and hunger had wrought havoc upon Annadoah. Ootah's heart ached. Finally her eyelids stirred. Her lips parted. A smile brightened her face. Ootah leaned forward breathlessly. Her lips framed an inaudible word. Olafaksoah, Olafaksoah. She opened her eyes. The smile faded. Thou, she said. Yea, Annadoah, I have brought thee food, Ootah said. It was his last. I hunger, she breathed. It is very cold. I was in the south, where the sun is warm. It is very cold here. Eagerly he pressed her hands. She drifted again into a stupor, and for a long while was silent. Ootah's warm, panting breath finally brought blood to her cheeks. Thou art so big and strong. She smiled again. Thy arms hurt me. As the embrace of Nanook the bear, her smile deepened. Her breath came more quickly. Oh, it is pleasant here in the south. Annadoah! Ootah's wail of hurt recalled her. Her eyes sought the igloo wonderingly. Thou? She repeated dully. Yea, it is cold here. I am hungry. Are there not Amingma in the mountains, Ootah? Didst thou not tell me there were Amingma in the mountains? Why do not the men of the tribe seek the musk oxen in the mountains? With a sudden start, Ootah remembered having told Annadoah of the herd he had found in the inland valley. It was strange, he thought. He had not remembered the herd before. And it was stranger still that now she should remind him. But the improbability of ever reaching the game, the obvious impossibility of such a journey at this time of winter, had prevented any such suggestion. Many musk oxen are there in the mountains, he said, soothing her hands. She drew them away. And thou art hungry. I am hungry, she replied faintly. After he had given her the last bit of meat, he left her igloo. Above him the stars burned. The air was clear and still. Not a thing moved. Not a sound was heard. The earth was gripped in that unrelenting spell of wintry silence. Above the imprisoned sea, the January moon was rising, and for 10 sleeps, 24-hour days, it would circle about the horizon of the entire sky. Already the sky above the sea was bright as a frosted globe of glass, and pearly fingers of light were stealing upward over the interior mountains. She is hungry, Ootah repeated over and over again, and the tribe starves, and there may be Amingma in the mountains. Behind him they loomed, gigantic and precipitous. That such a journey meant almost certain death, he knew, but that did not deter him in the resolve to essay a feat no native had ever dared in many hundreds of years. The face of Sipsu, the Angakok, as I have said, resembled dried and wrinkled leather. He had been an old man when the eldest of the tribe were children. He had seen hard times. He had suffered from starvation during many winters, yet never even in his experience had the lashes of Ukiah struck so blastingly upon the tribe. Yea, they had even lost their fear of the Tornarsut, and no longer brought propitiatory offerings of blubber to him. Yet being wise with age, early in the summer he had buried sufficient supplies beneath the floor of his house to keep him from starving. He scowled maliciously as he heard someone creeping through the underground entrance of his igloo. Presently the cadaverous face of Mai Sangwak appeared. The interior was heavy with the stench of oil. The room hung with soot from the lamp. A thin spiral thread of black smoke rose from the taper. In the dim light the leering face of Sipsu appeared like the face of the great demon himself. His small, half-closed eyes blazed through their slits. The spirits are wrathful. The tribe is forgetful. What wilt thou have? My Sangwak, with unconcealed hesitation, placed a bit of blubber before the magician. The last I have, he mumbled. Sipsu seized it avidly. Ootah goeth to the mountains, Mai Sangwak said, panting for breath. The old man sneered bitterly. He cannot brave the spirits. No man can live in the mountains. The breath of the spirits is death. Yea, he goeth. He says that he knows where the Amingma abound. The air is still. The moon rises for 10 sleeps. By then, so he saith, he can return with meat. No man hath ever ventured there. The shadow of Pertlugsuak is very dark. Yea, may he smite Ootah, exclaimed Mai Sangwak. Sipsu laughed harshly. Couldst thou cause the hill spirits to strike? Mai Sangwak asked eagerly. Sipsu faced Mai Sangwak fiercely. In my youth I went unto the mountains, and I heard the hill spirits sing. Thereupon I became a great magician. They spoke to me. I was silent thereafter. When I called, they answered. What wouldst thou? Mai Sangwak indicated the blubber. I would thou call them now, that they release the glaciers, that Ootah may be carried to his death. I hate Ootah. I would that he die. He shook his fist. Sipsu's body quivered from head to foot. Ootah hath never consulted my familiar spirits, he rejoined bitterly. He despiseth them. Rising from his sitting posture, Sipsu seized his drum and began moving his body. He groaned with extreme pain. By degrees his dance increased. He improvised a monotonous spirit song. His face grimaced demoniacally. As his conjuration approached the climax, his voice rose to a series of shrieks. He shuddered violently. He seemed to suffer agonies in his limbs. Finally he fell to the floor in a writhing paroxysm. Psst! Mai Sangwak's eyes lighted. Outside he heard the sharp barking of dogs. Hook! Hook! Ootah's voice called. Others joined in the clamor. The entire tribe seemed to wake as from a sleep of the dead. He starts for the mountains, said Mai Sangwak. Thinkest thou the spirits will strike? Sipsu opened his eyes and glared wildly at Mai Sangwak. Speak, Mai Sangwak demanded. Hast thou not the power? Did I not once go to the bottom of the sea to Nirvik, she who rules over the sea creatures? Has she not only one hand, and is she not powerless to plait her hair? Doth she not obey me? For did I not plait her hair? Did I not carry wood for weapons to the spirits of the mountains? And have they not answered for nigh 1,000 moons? Yet there is doubt in thy voice, Sipsu. Yea, to be truthful with thee, Mai Sangwak, there is dispute among the spirits. I cannot determine what they say. He bent his head as if listening. Then he asked, Doth Ootah not go that Annadoah may have food? Mai Sangwak nodded assent. And the tribe? Mai Sangwak again nodded, as though he suddenly heard some terrifying converse among his familiars. The necromancer's face blanched. He struggled to his feet. Take thy food. He flung the blubber to Mai Sangwak. I dare not take thy gift. I am afraid. Sangwak sprang at the old man. "Revoke not thy curse," he breathed, his fingers sinking into the Angakok's throat. "Will the hill spirit strike?" "Yea," the old man gasped, "but they say—" Sangwak's fingers loosened. "What?" he demanded. "That there is some other power, which is very strange, which, yea, protecteth Ootah. It concerneth Annadoah. I do not wish thy gift. I fear the spirits, the magic of Ootah. What it is, I cannot tell thee. But the spirits say it concerneth Annadoah, and against it none of the Tornarsuk can prevail." Sangwak threw the old man fiercely to the floor and disgusted left the igloo. Outside, the entire tribe, with the exception of those dying of hunger, had gathered in groups. Ootah lifted his whip. His team of 8 lean dogs howled. "Tukto, Tukto," he called. The dogs leaped into the air. His sled shot forward. Ootah strode forward in his desperate adventure. Ootah was joined by one of the younger members of the tribe, Kulotah by name, a lad barely 18 years of age. All the others had hung back. Kulotah's mother was dying. A desperate desire to save her stirred in his heart as he lifted his whip in the signal to start. The tribe cheered. "Hook! Hook!" he shouted, and his lean dogs followed Ootah's team. "Ow, ooh, ow, ooh!" called the natives. "Ow, ow!" The voices of Ootah and Kulotah returned. Over the snow-covered stretch of level shoreland, the moon poured a flood of silver incandescence. In this magical light, the forms of Ootah and his companion were magnified into the likeness of those of the giants that the old man said once lived in the highlands. Their dogs were distended into creatures of the size of musk oxen. Their whips exploded as they dashed past the straggling line of snow and stone houses. The snow crisply cracked and splintered under their feet. Then the village disappeared behind them. The voices of their tribesmen trailed shudderingly into silence. The assembled tribe watched the teams diminishing in the distance. Presently someone whispered a terrible thing. "Sipsu hath cursed at Ootah." A low, ominous murmur passed from lip to lip among the gathered men and women. In the distance, a black speck in the moonlight marked the departing hunters. "Yea, he hath called upon the spirit of the mountains to destroy Ootah." A low groan followed this. "Methinks he hath prophesied too many deaths," said Arnaluk. "He hath declared that Kulotah's mother will die, and Kulotah, did he not say 2 moons ago that Kulotah would depart on a long journey from which he should never return? And the wife of Ootah, did she not perish after his evil prophesy? And Piwatsok, did not the spirit of the skin tent strike him when he lay asleep? And did not yon evil wretch tell of it long before?" A dozen voices angrily rose in assent. "Verily he hath found hatred in his heart for Ootah, for Ootah hath had no need of his powers. Did not Ootah's mother sew into his cap the skin from the roof of a bear's mouth? And hath he not become as strong as the bear? Did not his father place in his ati the feet of a hawk? And have not his own feet the swiftness of the wings of a bird? And doth not Sipsu hate him for his strength? Yea, as he hateth all who are young, who are brave, and who find joy in their shadow." Their voices rose threateningly. Sangwak, chagrined and bitter at the old man, leered among the crowd. "Hath he not lived too long?" he whispered softly. And the others suddenly shouted, "Let Sipsu die!" In a wild rush they bore down upon the Angakok's igloo. Screaming with rage, they kicked in the sides. The icy dome shattered about the startled old man. They leaped upon him as hungry dogs upon a dying bear. A dozen hands ferociously gripped his throat. They moved to and fro in a mad struggle over the uneven ice. They seized hold of one another in the bloodthirsty desire to lay their hands upon the old man. He made no struggle. Finally all drew away. Amid the wreck of his igloo, Sipsu lay, motionless, his face sneering evilly in the moonlight. His dead lips seemed to frame a curse. They secured a rope of leather lashings and placed a noose about the old man's neck. Then they dragged his body from the wrecked igloo. Weak from lack of food, they still forced themselves to dig up the frozen snow at a spot where they knew there were stones, for according to their belief, they had to bury the old man, otherwise his spirit would haunt them. To this spot they brought the rotted skins of his bed, and on them placed the body, fearful lest they touch it. By the body they placed the old man's lamp, stone dishes, membrane drum, and instruments of incantation. Over the corpse they piled the ice-encrusted stones, and over these in turn weighty masses of frozen snow. Then they turned in silence and entered their respective shelters. Thenceforth, until a child should be born to whom it could be given, the name of Sipsu might not pass their lips. 6. And as he looked upon the descending wraiths, Ootah saw they had the spirit semblance of gleaming faces, and that their eyes burned through the enveloping cloud veils like fire. The dead, he said, we have come into a land of the dead. Then the glacial mountainside to which he clung trembled. The silver swimming world of white dust-driven fire became suddenly black, and the earth seemed removed from under him. Leaving the low-lying shore, Ootah's path led up through a narrow gorge between two great cliffs. Since he had returned from the mountains, the path had been covered by many successive falls of snow. At places the path sloped abruptly downward at a terrible angle, and the ice cracked and slid beneath the hardy hunter's feet. With the agility of cats, the dogs fastened their claws into the ice and climbed upward. Constantly the two men had to hold to the jagged rocks to their right, otherwise time after time they would have slipped into the perilous abyss below. Through the chasm the moon poured its liquid rays. At certain points towering crags shut off the light. Then Ootah and his companion had to feel their way slowly upward in the dark. Finally Ootah's dogs, with a loud chorus of barking, leaped ahead. Seizing an overhanging ledge of rock, Ootah lifted himself to the top of the precipice. Ootah's team followed. For interminable miles of vast icy plateaus stretched before them, a plain glistening with snow and reflecting like a burnished mirror the misty silveriness of the moon. Over the glacial expanse an eerily greenish phosphorescence, which palpitated and shifted at times with vivid splashes of opal and deeper tones of burning blue, hung low. The upland was split with thousands of canyons that writhed over the white expanse like snakes in tortuous convulsions. From these bottomless abysses arose a luminous amethystine vapor. In the depths, jutting icicles took fire and glowed through the lustrous mist like burning eyes, where the chasms joined with others, or widened ominous shapes, swathed in wind-blown blackish-purple robes, with extended arms, took form. As Ootah and Ootah dashed forward, great spaces of clear ice palpitated on all sides of them with interior opaline fires. Neither spoke. Holding the rear framework of their sleds, they trusted to the instinct of their dogs. Mile after mile swept under their feet. Their road often lay along the very edges of purple-black abysses. The echoes of their sharp gliding sleds cutting the ice, of the very patter of their dogs' feet, were magnified in volume in the clear air, and it seemed as though, in the hollow depths on every side, ghostly teams were following. Ootah was white with fear, but Ootah encouraged him onward. They paced off 20 miles. They reached an altitude of more than 1,000 feet above the sea. The great moon slowly circled about the sky. The scurrying clouds contorted like grotesque living things. The two hunters made precipitous descents over unexpected frozen slopes. At times it seemed as though they were about to be hurled to instantaneous death. Yet Ootah steeled his heart. His teeth chattered, but he gritted them firmly. "Annadoah needeth food," he murmured, and his eyes shone. A new pity not unmingled with a taint of bitterness filled his heart. Annadoah must live, she must have food. For a strange thing he observed had come upon her, her inexplicable moods, her brief moments of tenderness, her riotous griefs, and other prefigurements of maternity. These made her dearer to Ootah. So he vigorously cracked his whip and urged the dogs. The chasms twisted with lifelike motion all around him. Behind, as in a dream, Ootah heard the whip of Ootah, and the barking of Ootah's dogs. For hours his feet moved swiftly and mechanically under him. Once his foot slipped. He swerved to the right. A vast black mouth yawned hungrily to receive him. Then it closed behind him. The leaping team of dogs had pulled him forward. Luckily he maintained a tenacious hold to the rear upstander of his sled. Narrow chasms constantly cut their trail. With sharp howls the dogs leaped over these. The sleds passed safely, and by instinct Ootah would bound forward. Narrower than a man's stride in width, Ootah knew these slits in the glacial ice were hundreds of feet in depth, that a slip of the foot might plunge him to immediate death. Now and then he lost his footing on the uneven ice. His heart leaped for fear, but he held grimly to the sledge, and the lithe, lean but strong dog bodies carried him to safety. These faithful animals bounded over the glimmering ice field with amazing speed. They snapped and barked with the joy of the race. In the white moonlight, the vapor of their breathing enveloped them like a silvery cloud. For hours the hunters continued the trail. Their mighty purpose fought off fatigue. The moon passed behind cumulus mountains of clouds along the horizon, and periods of darkness blotted the world from Ootah. Then they traveled in darkness. A chill dampness rising from the gaping abysses that sundered the ice field told them of their danger. Then Ootah's heart chilled. His teeth were set chattering, but he thought of Annadoah and the grim need of food, and he gripped the upstander of his sled more determinedly. When the moon again unclosed its pearly sheen over the ice, the serpentine chasms moved their tortuous backs and writhed about them. The icy hummocks billowed, and the glittering ice-peaked horizon swam in a dizzy circle of diamonded light. As their trail ascended higher, the penetrating cold dampness somewhat moderated. In the taut air, the sound of their whips was like that of splitting metal. Shuddering and sepulchral echoes answered the barking of their dogs. The faithful ghosts of the dogs of fallen hunters were following their departed masters in the amethystine mists of the canyons about them. Ootah and Ootah trembled with the thought of the dreadful nearness of the dead. Believing other animals to be ahead, the dogs set up a wilder, shriller howling. Then the echoes came back with more startling and terrifying proximity. Ootah's flesh crept. Finally, with an explosive sound, Ootah let his whip fall. "All late! Halt!" he called. They came to a dead standstill. "Psst!" he whispered. He hit the snapping, whining dogs. "Psst!" They crouched to the ground and whined mournfully. "Dost thou hear?" Ootah asked in a hushed voice. In the moonlight, Ootah saw that the lad's face was as white as the face of the dead, and that in his eyes was a wild fear. From the mountain ridges which loomed beyond came an ominous noise resembling a low wind. Ootah bent his head and listened to the sobbing monotone, then whispered, "The breathing of the spirits of the hills who sleep." "Perchance we waken them," Ootah ventured. "That would be bad," Ootah replied. "I have left my mother forever," Ootah wailed. "Be brave, lad, they need food. Beseech the spirits of those who lived when men's sap was stronger, thy ancestors, for strength. Come!" Ootah raised his head, then uttered a low cry of alarm. He drew back fearfully, pointing with a trembling arm to the mountain pass ahead. Covered with glacial snow and ice, the slopes of the first ridge of the interior mountains gleamed with frosted silver. Over the white expanse, formed by the countless clefts and indentations of the slope, cyclopean shadows took form, and like eldritch figures joining their hands in a wild dance, loomed terrifyingly before the two men. Their trail now ascended through a gorge which abruptly opened immediately before them. Into this rugged chasm the argent moonlight poured, and from unseen caverns in the past glowered monstrous phosphorescent green and ruby eyes. From the heights above, fragments of clouds descended through the chasm. In the full moonlight they were transformed into tall aerial beings of unearthly beauty. They were swathed in luminous robes that fluttered gently upon the air, and like the birds they soared, with tremulous wings resembling films of silver. They moved softly, with great majesty. As he looked upon the descending race, Ootah saw they had the spirit semblance of gleaming faces, and that their eyes burned through the enveloping cloud veils like fire. He drew back, afraid. "The dead," he murmured. "We have come unto the land of the dead." Both stood in silence, reverent, awed, half afraid. Then Ootah snapped his whip. He called to the dogs. "Let us go unto them. Let us show that men are not afraid. Hook, 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 come!" The dogs howled, the traces tightened, the sled sped forward. They entered the defile. The trail twisted up the side of the abyss. Less than 3 feet wide for long stretches, the dogs had to slacken and pass upward in line one by one. Covered with new ice, it was dangerously slippery, and in climbing the men had to hold to jutting icicles for support. Ootah was ahead. At times sheer walls of ice confronted him. At certain places there had been drifts, at others glacial fragments had slipped from the mountain above. Before these almost insuperable walls, Ootah would pause and with his axe hew steps in the hard ice. They slowly toiled ahead for an hour. Then a blank sloping ice wall twice the height of Ootah blocked the path. He grasped his axe and began hewing a series of ascending steps. He breathed with difficulty. The air in the high altitude made respiration difficult. He was soon bathed in perspiration. The moisture of his breath and beads of sweat froze about his face, covering him with an icy mask. His eyelashes froze together. He had to pause to melt the quickly congealing tears. He suffered unendurably. Finally his axe split. The ice was harder than his steel. He uttered an impatient exclamation. "Thy axe!" he called to Kulata. Kulata swung his axe in the air and over the dog team, separating them. Ootah leaped from his feet and caught the axe as it soared above him. In a half hour the step-like trail was cut, and he clambered over the wall. Digging their nails into the indentations, the dogs followed. Then Kulata and his team scaled the obstruction. Kulata felt his heart choking him as it seemed to enlarge within. Ootah, in truth, was not entirely unafraid. Both knew that a slip of the foot would plunge them to instant death. As they ascended the trail, the gathering clouds surrounded them. They could no longer see their dogs. They could not even perceive the blackness of the chasm to their right. Above and below they were enveloped in a silver mist. Only the reflected glitter of the moonlight on jutting icicles on the opposite indicated the depths so perilously near. Through the mist, Kulata saw the green and crimson eyes of baleful creatures that might, at any moment, spring upon him. When they reached the inland valley, they were both spent in strength. In sheer relief from the agonized suspense of the journey, they sank on their sledges and lay palpitating for an hour or more. But the cold froze their perspiring garments, and they had to rise and exercise so as not to freeze to death. Ootah knew that no time could be lost. In the interior mountains, the breathing of the hill spirits was becoming more uneasy, and Ootah noted with anxiety the increasing moderation of the atmosphere. That was not well. When the cold relented, the hill spirits released the glaciers. With frantic eagerness they explored the valley. The green grass whereon Ootah had seen the splendid animals grazing months before was covered with ice. There was no sign of the arming Ma. Ootah's heart sank. He felt very much like weeping. Suddenly the dogs began to sniff the air and bark hungrily. "Aming Ma!" Kulata cried joyfully. Ootah released the team. The dogs made a misty black streak in their dash over the ice. The men followed. In the shelter of a cave they found 5 musk oxen. They were huddled together and half numb with cold. They roared dully as the howling dogs assaulted them and rushed lumberingly from the cave into the moonlight. 5 great black hulks, with mighty manes of coarse hair, they ambled over the ice for a space of 500 feet, and then, surrounded by the dogs, assembled in a circle, their backs together, their heads facing the howling dogs. Thus they were prepared to protect themselves from attack. The dogs, frantic with hunger, made fierce rushes at the animals. Now and then, as the dogs dashed forward, one of the great beasts would charge, its head lowered, and the dogs would leap backward into the air and scatter. Then turning, the animal would rush back to its companions as fast as its numbed legs could carry it. Through the white vapor of their breath, which half hid their great horned heads, Ootah could see the eyes of the musk oxen. They were greenish and phosphorescent. Occasionally the creatures roared sullenly, but the fight was less exciting than it would have been had they'd been less torpid from hunger and cold. Ootah called away the dogs and raised his gun, one which Olafaksoah, in payment for the 5 sledloads of walrus blubber which he confiscated after Ootah's flight to the mountains, had left with a generous supply of ammunition with a companion. Ootah now realized the value of the payment which he had scorned. There was a yellow flash in the moonlight. A mighty roar went up. The dogs, with a cyclonic dash, swooped upon the fallen monster, snapping viciously at it as it roared in its death agony. Frightened, the other 4 scattered. One rushed into the shelter of the cave. The other 3, dispersing, soon became diminishing black specks in the moonlight. The dogs would have followed, but Ootah called them back. One animal was even more than they could manage. With quick dispatch they fell upon the animal with their knives. Neither spoke, they worked breathlessly. With marvelous skill they peeled off the heavy skin, and with amazing dexterity carved great masses of bleeding meat clean from the bones. When they had finished, only a great skeleton remained. Outside the cave, eager, whining, the starving dogs obediently crouched. When they had completed the task of dressing, Ootah lifted his hand, and the canines, with howling avidity, fell upon the steaming mass of entrails. Upon the 2 sledges the hunters loaded and lashed securely their treasure of meat. In the moonlight the hot steam rose from the tremulous masses, and Ootah's nostrils dilated with eager, anticipatory delight. The blood dripped upon the snow, and Ootah's stomach ached. He had not dared to think of eating until now. Their hands shaking with nervous hunger, the 2 fell upon the remaining meat. They feasted with that savage, hungry joy known only to human creatures who have faced starvation. When they started on the return journey, there was a new, vibrant elasticity in their steps. Ootah snapped his whip and sang, and his heart sang too of Annadoah. Looking at the clouds as they drifted through the valley, Ootah imagined he saw Annadoah lying upon her couch asleep, and in the faint light of an oil lamp he saw upon her face a pleased smile. Of what doth Annadoah dream? Ootah asked the winds. Of springtime when the flowers bloom, the winds replied, and Annadoah will move to a new skin tent with Ootah. He said joyously, exultantly, Ootah will bring food unto Annadoah, and she will reward him with her love. Foolish Ootah, moaned the wind. Love cannot be won with food, neither with amingma meat nor walrus blubber. Ootah felt his heart sink. A vague and heavy misgiving filled him. Being very simple, he had always thought that by securing wealth, in dogs and food, in guns and ammunition, and by achieving preeminence on the hunt, he should win Annadoah's confidence and love. But now, upon the breath of the winds, by the voices of nature, doubt came into his heart, the mistake of many men the world over, and of many wiser than he could not understand just why this was, this thing the wind said, and which his own heart correspondingly whispered. With food he might possibly win Annadoah's consent to be his wife. Yes, he knew that, but Annadoah's love, that was another thing. Surely he now realized as he strode along that by simply giving her food he could not expect to stir in her heart a response to that which throbbed in his. But why? Singularly, he never thought of the bravery of his seeking food on this perilous adventure, an act which, had he known it, had indeed touched the heart of the beautiful maiden. With the quick atmospheric change of the Arctic, a phenomenon common to zones of extreme temperature, the wind steadily increased in velocity and warmth. The shallow moon-shot clouds on the ice thickened and swept softly under the 2 travelers' feet. Above their waists the air was clear. They saw each other distinctly in the moonlight. Yet their dogs, hidden in the low-lying vapor, were invisible. Great masses of clouds slowly piled along the horizon, and the moon was often obscured. Then the two walked in a darkness so thick it seemed palpable. "Hark!" Ootah called during one of these spells. "What is that?" A shuddering sound split the air. The ice field on which they traveled vibrated with an ominous jar. The echoes of splitting ice came like distant explosions. "Have we disturbed the spirits of the hills?" asked Ootah in a whisper. "No, no," answered Ootah anxiously. "Hook! Hook!" He snapped his whip and urged the dogs. They had not gone 20 paces when from the interior heights of Greenland came a series of muffled explosions. Undoubtedly the hill spirits had wakened and, angry, were hurling their terrible weapons. They reached, in due course, the top of a mountain ridge, down part of the glassy slopes of which they had to make their way to the entrance of the cleft in which the trail they had so laboriously hewn lay. The gorge yawned blackly some 500 feet below. In anticipation of their return with loaded sledges, Ootah, on the last reach of their upland climb, had chopped on the smooth snows of the mountainside, a narrow path that ran backward and forward in the fashion of a gently inclining, elongated spiral. The mountain sloped at an angle of 80 degrees, but by descending cautiously along this circuitous trail, a safe descent was possible. While Ootah and his companions stood on the peak, the moon passed behind a veil of clouds, and Ootah felt two soft wraith-like hands pass over his face, cloud hands which his simple mind believed were sentient things. His heart for the moment seemed to stop. Thus the kind spirits warned men of danger. At that instant a stinging sound smote the air. The glacial side of the mountain trembled, and as the moon reappeared on the icy slopes, Ootah saw narrow black cracks zigzagging in various directions. A cataclysmic rumbling sounded deep in the earth. When the echoes died away, he turned to Ootah. "Be brave of heart. Let us go. There is no time to lose." "Hook, hook, hook," they urged the dogs gently, arranging themselves instinctively in single file, the traces slackening. The wonderful dogs, with feline caution, crept ahead. Lowering their bodies, each behind his sledge, Ootah and Ootah began moving stealthily downward. With one hand each clung to the rough icy projections of the slope. With the other they held the rear upstander of their sleds to prevent them from sliding with their precious loads of meat down the mountainside. Halfway down, Ootah uttered a cry. His quick ear detected a faint splitting noise, like the crack of young ice forming under his feet. In an instant he realized their danger. At the time he had reached a hollow in the perilous slope. The dogs ahead, with quick instinct, retreated and crouched at his feet in the sheltering cradle. Ootah saw Ootah turn and look inquiringly upward. The next moment, driven downward by the wind, a mass of clouds, glittering with bleached moonfire, rolled over the slopes and hid Ootah. Ootah only heard his voice. Then the glacial mountainside to which he clung trembled. A terrific crash like that of cannon followed. The very mountain seemed to shake. For a brief, awful spell everything was still. Then, with an appalling thunder, the ice split and began to move. The moon reappeared, and Ootah, in a tense moment, saw chasms widening about him on the glistening slope. He heard the deafening, echoing explosions of splitting ice in the distance. With fierce ferocity he instinctively fastened one bleeding hand to an icy projection above him. With the other he held with grimly desperate determination to the sled. In the next dizzy instant he felt the icy floor beneath him lurch itself forward and downward. Before his very eyes he saw Ootah and his team, not 20 feet below, wiped from existence by the descending glacier to which he clung, and in the hollow crevice of which he found security. In a second space he caught a clear vision of tremendous masses of green and purple glaciers being ground to fine powder in their swift descent on all sides of him. He saw the feathery ice fragments catch fire in the moonlight. He heard the elemental roar and grinding crash of ice mountains sundering in a titanic convulsion. Then he lost hearing. In that same sick, bewildering moment of preternatural consciousness, he thought wildly of Annadoah. He saw her appealing wan face amid the blur of white moonlight. He knew she needed food, and he felt an ache at his heart. He called upon the spirits of his ancestors. Then the silvery swimming world of white dust-driven fire became suddenly black, and the earth seemed removed from under him. In the village, the natives were awakened from their lethargic sleep by the faraway crash of the avalanche. Their faces blanched as they thought of the hunters. "The hill spirits have smitten! Ow! Ow!" they moaned. In her igloo, Annadoah, who had waited with sleepless anxiety, wept alone. Of all in the village, only the heart of one, Maisengwak, was glad. Seventh, the utter tragedy of her devotion to the man who had deserted her, and the utter hopelessness of his own deep passion, blightingly, horribly forced itself upon him. Ootah asked himself all the questions men ask in such a crisis, and he demanded with wild weeping their answer from the dead rejoicing in the auroral Valhalla. But there was no answer, as perhaps there may be no answer, or if there is, that God-fearing lest, in attaining the great desire, men should cease to endeavor, to serve and to labor, has kept it locked where he and the dead live beyond the skies. The moon dipped behind the horizon. For 5 sleeps naught had been heard from Ootah, and his companion Inetlia, the sister of Kulata, followed in turn by some of the other women, visited the igloo of Annadoah. Upon her couch of moss Annadoah lay, and over her a cover given by Ootah, and lined with the feathers of birds. "'Twas thou who sent Ootah to the mountains," one complained. "May the ravens peck thine eyes," cried another. Annadoah shook her head sadly and wept. "'Twas thou who chose Olafaksoah, the robber from the south, that thou mightest be his wife, and 'twas thou his wife who beguiled the men and robbed thy tribe. Did we not give away our skins, and didst thou not make garments for Olafaksoah, and do we not now shudder from the cold? 'Twas thou who put the madness into the head of Ootah, the strongest of the tribe. Many are the maidens who are husbandless, and yet Ootah pined for thee. Why didst thou not choose Ootah? Then he would have remained and prevented the thievery of the strangers. We should not have been robbed, and he would not have had to go far unto the mountains, where the spirits have struck him in their wrath. Nay, nay, thou didst make the men of our tribe sick with thoughts of thee. They have quarreled among themselves, and before the white men came, did they not reproach us, their wives and their betrothed, with thy name and the vaunted skill of thee? Thou art as the woman with an iron tail, she who killed men when they came to her, their skins flushed with love. Thou destroyest men. Thou didst send Ootah and Kulata to the mountains, and they have perished. Io, entering her igloo 2 or 3 at a time, they reproachfully recited in chiding chants to Annadoah the story of her life, how her worthy mother and august grandparents had died, hoping she would choose a husband from the hunters, and how she had refused all who sought her. They told with reiterant detail how she had caused quarrels among the men, and sent many of the warriors in their competitive hunts to death, and how, finally, when Ootah, the bravest of the hunters, wanted to wed her, she had chosen a foreign man who deserted her and left her a burden on the tribe. Sometimes they shook her roughly. To the native women, the brutality and virility of the men from the south exert a potent appeal, and the fact that Olafaksoah had chosen Annadoah many moons since still made their mouth taste bitter. This jealousy rankling within them, they now, with angry exultation, took occasion to mock and abuse her. The girl lay still and did not reply. Her heart indeed seemed like a bird lying dead in winter-time. Then one of 3 women who stood by Annadoah's couch leaned forward and whispered a terrible thing. The others looked at the girl, and fear mingled with hatred shone in their eyes. "Thou sayest this thing," said one. "How dost thou know?" And the other, pointing accusingly to the girl who lay before them, her face hidden in her arms, replied, "The night my baby died, I heard her voice." They stood in silence, rigid, implacable, bitter. During the latter dark days, a terrible calamity had made itself felt among the tribe. This was the death of many of the newly born outside the igloos during the past months. As the babies had come, the number of tiny mounds had increased, and when the aurora flooded the skies, heartbroken mothers could be seen weeping over these graves of snow. It is not uncommon in this land for babies to die at birth or come prematurely, but the number of recent deaths and tragic accidents to expectant mothers was unprecedented. This was undoubtedly due to the depleted vitality of the starving mothers, but to the natives there was some other, some unaccountable, some sinister cause. In their hearts they experienced, each time a new mound rose white in the moonlight, that tremulous terror of a people who instinctively fear extinction. The grief of a mother was for a personal loss. To the tribe, each death meant an even greater, more significant loss, a thing of more than personal consequence. And when, out of the dim regions of her brain, one of the women now conjured the terrible thing which she whispered concerning Annadoah, it was little wonder the other two regarded the girl as a thing hateful and accursed. "She stealeth souls." Nothing more frightful could have been said. "Yea, the night my baby died, I heard her voice," repeated Annadoah angrily, and the other, among the superstitious voices in her memory, found it not difficult to recall a similar thing. "Methinks I heard her sing the night my own little one came, too soon." And the third whispered, "She is as the hungry hill spirit who feasts upon the entrails of the dead. Yea, she carrieth off the souls of the children. Ayo, ayu." Their voices rose in a maniacal cry of terror and denunciation. Annadoah rose. Clasping her hands, she demanded piteously, "Why sayest ye this of me?" And they shrieked, "Thou stealest souls, by the Angakok shalt thou be accursed." "No, no, no, no," the girl pleaded, falling on her knees and weeping. Although they suddenly ceased their reviling, hearing outside the barking of dogs, the women thereafter in secret often assembled together. There were ominous whisperings, and each time a child died visits were paid to the Angakok, and the unseen powers were invoked to bring misfortune to Annadoah. Outside, the silenced women detected the barking of dogs approaching the village from the distance. They heard the excited calls of tribesmen and the chatter of other women. One by one they crept from the igloo. A strange light in her eyes, Annadoah followed. Over the mountains to the north, a soft and wondrous light began to palpitate tremulously. While the men of the tribe rushed to meet the oncoming team of dogs in the distance, the women stood and gazed with awe upon the increasing wonder in the skies. The northern lights, seen nowhere else so splendidly in all the world, had begun the weaving of their glorious and eerie imagery. A nebulous film of silvery light wavered with incredible swiftness over the heavens. The snow-blanketed land took instantaneous fire in the sudden flares. In the torridly tropic heaven of the virtuous dead and unknown God, so the tribes believe, makes fire. Just as in the nether regions beneath the earth, the great evil, who has revealed himself with a more terrible reality than the great benign, creates cold and forges ice. In that land of the happy dead disclosed in the aurora, there is never any night, nor is it ever cold. So the souls there are always happy. Sometimes in their revels they troop earthward to cheer the mortals who suffer from Perluxwak's frigid breath as it comes during winter from hell. The women looked at one another. The augury was good. "The spirits of the dead," one whispered, "are happy. They are playing ball." Into their midst, surrounded by the glad, cheering men of the tribe, Ootah staggered. His face was cut and covered with black clotted blood, his legs dragged with utter exhaustion. His features were gaunt and marked by lines of frightful suffering. His eyes were bright with the light of fever. When he saw Annadoah, a faint but very glad smile passed over his countenance. He made an effort to forget the anguished throes of pain in his limbs and the intermittent shudderings of cold and flushes of intense fever. He tried to speak, but then shook his head sadly. Instead, he pointed to the dilapidated sledge. 3 of his dogs had perished, 5 had been saved. The sled had been battered, but was lashed together. Upon it, however, the precious load of meat was intact. The subtle aroma of it sent a wave of gladness through the crowd. They danced about Ootah, asking questions. Ootah staggered backward and sank helpless against the sledge. After a while he found voice. "I am very weak," he managed to say. Several of the women disappeared and soon returned with a bit of walrus blubber. This, having undergone a process of fermentation in the earth, possessed the intoxicating qualities of alcohol. It is used by the natives for purposes of stimulation in such cases and in their celebrations. Ootah with difficulty ate this. He felt stronger and rose. "Thou art ill," said Annadoah, approaching him and gently touching his wounded face. "Enter. Annadoah will care for thee." Her face was perilously near him. It was very wan and beautiful in the auroral light. Ootah felt his heart beat wildly, but it was pity, not love, that shone softly from Annadoah's eyes. "Thy igloo is cold, thy lamp unlighted," Annadoah insisted. "Come, the others will prepare thy couch and light thy lamps. Until then my bed is thine. It is warm within." With difficulty, Ootah bent low and followed Annadoah through the underground entrance of her igloo. His dogs, which the men had unhitched, and as many as could enter the small enclosure, followed. The stench of the oil lamp at first almost suffocated him. He sank to Annadoah's couch from sheer weakness, and his dogs, licking his face and hands, crept about him. Meanwhile, Annadoah began melting snow over her lamp. The others plied Ootah with questions. Did he go far into the mountains? Were there many Amingma? Did Kulota perish? Was he in the mountains when the spirit struck? To all of this he could only move his head in response. While he sipped the warm water gratefully, Annadoah cut away his leather boots and bathed his injuries. His flesh was torn, and one ankle was sprained. By a miracle not a bone had been broken in the fall. With unguents left years before by white men, Annadoah treated his many cuts and bruises and bound them securely with clean leather. After he lay back on the couch, she bathed his face and rubbed into the wound salves which her father had given to her mother and which for years had been preciously preserved. Ootah lay with his eyes closed. He seemed to float in the auroral skies without, in the very happy land of the dead. He forgot the pain in his limbs, the furnace in his forehead. He felt only the soothing touch of Annadoah's dear hands, and her breath at times very near, fanning his face. He heard her voice murmuring to the onlooking natives. Not satisfied with these ministrations, in which they really had little faith, the others presently brought a young Angakok, one better loved than the dead Sipsu. For being young, he had not prophesied many deaths. All moved away as the magician began beating his membrane drum over Ootah's body. Working himself into frenzy, he called upon his familiar spirits. For, according to their belief, illness and the suffering resultant from wounds are actually caused by the spirits of the various members of the body falling out of harmony. Then the Angakok must persuade his friends in the other world to restore peace among the spirits of the human hands, feet, head, or whatever limbs may be affected. The soul, or great spirit, they say, resides in one's shadow, and sometimes this falls out of agreement with the minor spirits of the body. Then one is in bad shape indeed. For half an hour the chant and dance continued. Meanwhile Ootah opened his eyes and often smiled at Annadoah. He was better, he told them, and motioned the Angakok to go. He bade Annadoah sit beside him. He felt unquestionably better. "You have asked me whether I went far over the mountains. Yea, we traveled many sleeps, yet we scarcely rested. The world was white about us. The spirits carried us over dark places in the hills, wherein Olafaksoah makes his home. But he did not strike. We were born over abysses. The spirits of one's ancestors are often kind. We went through the world of the fog. She who was the wife of that hill spirit, who carried the dead from their graves and ate them. Yea, she passed beneath our feet. We came to the high mountains. We passed upward where the eyes of strange beasts glared upon us. I was afraid, but I called upon my father. Then the spirits of the great dead came down upon us. They wove kamiks and atis of fire. Their eyes burned as the great light of the stars. They did not regard us. We came unto the Aming-Ma, but upon our return the hill spirits who live in the caves wakened and struck with their great harpoons. They shook the mountains. Then the good ancestors carried me through Sela, the world of the air. Yea, my dogs, my sledge, and the Aming-Ma meet. I had called upon those who went before me. I woke at the bottom of the mountain. 3 of my dogs were crushed. My sledge was broken. I lay there a while. I slept again, often. Then I lashed the sled, ate a little of the Aming-Ma meat, and came hither. How, Ootah knows not. It was hard at times. I could hardly walk. The ice moved about me, always so. He described a circle with his hand. But I bethought me of Annadoah. He smiled, and I said, I go to Annadoah. That is how I came. I said, Annadoah is hungry. Yes, I said it when the eyes looked at me on the mountains, when the hill spirits made my heart grow cold, when Ootah desired to return. Ootah, he hath gone. Ootah's dogs are gone. But I called upon my dead father, my dead grandfather, and the older ones, and I thought of Annadoah. He leaned toward her yearningly, his voice trembling. Fearfully the girl drew away. It is she who brought the Aming-Ma meat, he said. It is she who led me to the Aming-Ma. Yea, she brings you the Aming-Ma meat. For the thought of her brings Ootah back after the spirits strike. It is she who lives in the heart of Ootah, who has done all this. But you are hungry. Come. He rose slowly and crept through the underground tunnel leading from the igloo. The others followed. Without, most of the tribe were waiting. At Ootah's command, the men unlashed the sledge load of meat, and the division began. To Annadoah, Ootah gave 1/8 of the load, enough to last by frugal use for more than 2 moons or months. Among the others, of whom there were about 25, the remainder was proportionately divided. For himself, Ootah reserved only as much as he gave the others. Outside Annadoah's igloo, all engaged in a joyous revel. Hungrily they feasted upon the raw meat. Then they beat drums and danced. Their voices rose in hilarious chants. Wild joy shook them. Ootah was acclaimed hero of the tribe. Although they have no chiefs, he was accorded the honor of being the bravest and strongest among them. And to the strongest and most heroic, the last word in all things belonged. Of all who were able to participate in the celebration, Mai Sangwak alone retired. From the seclusion of his igloo entrance, he watched the scene with rancor in his heart. Over the northern skies, the auroral lights played, lighting the scene of spontaneous rejoicing with magical glory. Great silver coronas, or rings of light, constantly arose in the north, passed to the zenith, and melted as they descended to the south. Luminous curtain-like films closed and parted alternately like the veils of a Valhalla drawn back and forth before the warrior souls of the north. Tremendous fan-shaped shafts of opalescent fire shot toward the zenith, and like searchlights moved to and fro across the sky. The clouds became illumined with an interior flame and glowed like diaphanous mists of gold, half concealing the vague faces of the beauteous spirits of the dead. Their billowing edges palpitated with a tremor as of quicksilver. Within and through this imperial web of light, marvelous scenes were simultaneously woven. They lasted a moment's space and vanished. The natives, dancing unrestrainedly, saw heavenly mountain slopes covered with grass of emerald fire and glittering with starry flowers. They saw the gigantic shadows of celestial Aming-Ma passing behind the clouds, and here and there were the cyclopean adumbrations of great caribou and creatures for which they did not have a name. A tossing sea of rippling waves of light was presently unfolded, and over it they saw millions of birds with wings of fire soaring with bewildering rapidity from horizon to zenith. This faded, monstrous, and gorgeous flowers of living rainbow tints burst into bloom. Fields of them momentarily covered the heaven. These the natives regarded with only half accustomed wonder, for they knew there were strange flowers in the land of the dead. As they danced, the colored imagery steadily faded in the growing intensity of the great banded coronas that rose from the north. A light of cold electric fire increasingly blazed over the heavens until a frigid silver day, brighter than any day of sunshine, reached its brief noon upon the earth. Rocking their bodies and singing, the natives dispersed to their respective igloos. Sitting on his sledge by Annadoah, Ootah dimly heard their voices echoing into silence. He experienced terrible pains again in his limbs and the fever in his head. Everything became dizzy, and with a sick feeling of faintness he crept into Annadoah's igloo and fell upon her couch. It was in his heart to ask her once again to be his, to repeat the protestation of his love. He felt that he had shown he deserved to win her,